The Surface Pro 8. Has Microsoft Redesign 2-in-1 done enough to justify its high price? Hi, it's David at Mash IT, and tonight we're going to be reviewing the Microsoft Surface Pro 8. Microsoft have finally redesigned the Surface Pro 8 tablet. This is a much needed improvement because we've been on the same design since about the Surface Pro 4. Now I'm a big fan of the Surface Pro devices and I've had every single revision since the Surface Pro 1, and I'm always a sucker for buying the new ones up until about the Surface Pro 6. They got quite long in the tooth, the design had been the same for years, they were using the same screens, you can't upgrade anything, and I got really quite annoyed with the high prices and the minimal increases each year. So when the Surface Pro 7 came around, I did review it, but I didn't keep one for myself, and that is unusual. Now Microsoft righted some of those wrongs with the Surface Pro 7 Plus. We reviewed the i5 and the i7 model. Now Gary kept the i7 and I kept the i5, and we've been really impressed with them. And the biggest improvements with the Surface Pro 7 Plus was not only did you get the 11th gen processors, which made quite a big difference to the actual performance of the machine, but you actually had an upgradable SSD. Now with how much Microsoft charges to upgrade their SSDs when you're configuring your device, it's something that always put me off, so I always ended up with the base model. So the fact that I could then upgrade it myself with a 30mm SSD, and it's a very easy job to do as well, and we do have a video on that if you are interested in doing it, it makes complete and utter sense. So then in comes 2021 last year, where they introduced the Surface Pro 8. Now we are a bit slow getting our hands on it. When it officially launched, I wasn't initially interested. One of my biggest gripes with this new model, you lose the micro SD card slot and you lose the old-fashioned USB 3.1. And I am a sucker for having legacy ports because I do often plug in SSDs and mice and keyboards to my device. So I did enjoy having that legacy port. But with the upgradable SSD, that pretty much negated my need for the micro SD card because I only used it to increase the base model storage. And the fact that we've now got two Thunderbolt 4 ports, it does actually end up making the machine a lot more versatile. Now I have started to learn to live with Bluetooth mice, and they certainly have improved over the years. Now this is just a Razer Oroki here, which actually has Bluetooth or a dongle. So basically I'll often use Bluetooth when I'm out and about, and I'll have the actual dongle plugged into my dock in the office. And I found that is a great way for me to be able to work these days, especially as this is such a portable mouse. With that in mind, and the fact that we've also now got Thunderbolt 4 ports, which will enable eGPUs and high-speed storage, I thought, do you know what, let's get this in. But as usual with Microsoft, the prices on these were absolutely ridiculous on launch, especially in the UK, with the base model being £1,000, and that's just for the actual 2-in-1 device itself. You've also got to buy a new type cover, because the Surface Pro 4 to 7 type covers, which have been backwards compatible in the past, no longer work with this model, and this now uses the type cover from the Surface Pro X. Also, then you use the new pen that's also included with the Surface Pro X, which is magnetically held in the type covers tray. And I must admit, this is a much better way of storing the pen, because obviously with the last models, there was a magnet on the side, and that was great. The pen was always there when you needed it, but there was a number of occasions where I slipped the laptop into my bag and knocked the pen off. So what else has changed this year? Well, a couple of things. As I say, we've got Thunderbolt 4 now. The biggest thing for me, we've actually got a 120Hz screen. Now, yes, this isn't a gaming laptop, so is a 120Hz screen even necessary on a device like this? Well, you'd be surprised. Once you've started using a high refresh rate, and I use them here all the time in the office, going back to a 60Hz screen, I do find very sluggish. So even in day-to-day use, I actually appreciate a 120Hz plus panel. And this has been fast and responsive, and I've really enjoyed using it. And not only is it 120Hz, but the screen size is now bigger. As you can see, we've got much less bezel with this model. This isn't a problem when you're using it as a tablet, because you find you won't put your thumbs or your fingers just on the edges. You won't be holding onto the screen still. So it's still very usable as a tablet. But in all honesty, Windows 10 and now Windows 11 is still not that tablet friendly. So I'm only ever use it as a tablet when I'm drawing. The rest of the time, I do actually use it as a laptop. Now, Microsoft will be implementing a variable refresh rate where it will switch from 60 to 120Hz depending on what you're doing, but out of the box, you do have to switch it manually. Now, if you want battery life, you're going to need to switch it to 60Hz, but if you want, obviously, the faster refresh rate like I do, I just leave it on 120Hz. I'm very often plugged in, or I've got a power bank to hand anyway. Now, we will talk about battery life in a little while, but before we do that, the next thing that's changed with these models, every single Surface Pro 8 has a fan. Now, if you know the previous Surface Pros, the i5 versions or the i3 versions were fanless. And that was great. I actually bought the i5 and I kept the i5 because I didn't want a fan in my device. The previous fans were quite whiny. Gary had the i7 and the i7 actually sitting here. when the fan does kick in, you certainly hear it. So when I found out that this model had a fan, at first I was quite disappointed because I was worried it was going to be quite whiny. But I've actually been really impressed with it. In day-to-day use, the fan rarely comes on, and because it rarely comes on, I didn't even realise I had a fan at first. It's not until you're really heavily utilising the CPU or you're gaming on this machine, we actually hear the fan like spin up to audible levels. But what this means is, even the i5s and especially the i7s, they've actually allowed this device to push the power budgets. So this will now run higher wattage for a much more extended time frame than the previous generations. And from my testing so far, this Surface Pro 8 gets about 25% faster performance than the same CPU in the Surface Pro 7 Plus. That's quite a big increase, and that's purely because of this new improved cooling system and the small fan in here. So this does mean that you will hear the fans even on the i5s if you're actually pushing this machine hard. Now when I'm gaming, I do hear the fans, but because the fan is not a whining sound, I've been really enjoying it. And I have actually ended up using this for quite a lot of lightweight games. A bit of Dota, a bit of CSGO. Runs absolutely amazingly, and with this 120Hz panel, it's been a lovely experience, much more so than the Surface Pro 7 Plus that I had before. Now, the last thing that's pretty much changed with this model over the previous Surfaces, they've now changed the button layout. There's no longer any buttons across the top. We now have the volume rocker on the left-hand side of the laptop with a headset jack below it, and on the right-hand side, we actually have the power switch and the two Thunderbolt 4 ports below, and finally, we have the usual Microsoft MagSafe port that they've been using on all these Surfaces. Now the good news is, if you've got previous Surface devices and you've got the docks and the chargers, they are still going to work with this model. That for me is very handy because I've got loads of Surface Pro chargers lying around the office, plus I have the dock as well, which I've often used. Also now we've got Thunderbolt 4, you'll probably have a Thunderbolt 4 monitor or dock anyway, so that pretty much makes that non-existent, but it's nice that we do have that option. Now also the good news with this Surface Pro 8, Microsoft will be offering a cellular variant at some point. I think it's pretty much due for release. So if that's something that does interest you, you will be able to pick one of those up. But this here that I've bought for the actual review units, this is just a basic i5 base model with 8GB of RAM and 128GB SSD. Now, of course, I'm going to be upgrading the SSD myself. As I said, I have already done a video on how to upgrade the SSD from the 7 Plus. It's exactly the same for the Surface Pro 8, but I probably will record it when I upgrade this model as well. And my only gripe with regards to the specs when it comes to Microsoft is the fact that they're still putting in 8GB of RAM in the base model. I mean, we're in 2021 now, and I know that Microsoft have always been very tight when it comes to storage and RAM, but when are we going to start seeing 16GB, the minimum that these devices will be offering? This is a premium laptop that's £1,000 just for the tablet. As I said, with the SSD, I'm not bothered about the 128GB. A lot of people can live with that, but I'll be ripping it out anyway. But you still also need to buy the Surface Pro Typecover, and if you want it, the new magnetic pen. You won't be able to use your old Surface Pro cover. With regards to this Typecover, they're pretty much the same as the previous versions, except for the fact that we've got the pen in the actual well at the top. They come in obviously the Alcantara finish, which is something I've absolutely loved all through these last few years of Surface Pros. It's comfortable to type on. These are still a great keyboard to type on. They're nice and functional. They've got a great feeling keyboard. It's backlit. The touchpad is responsive and works well. Plus, obviously, you can use the touch straight onto the actual tablet itself. You can use it obviously at a slight incline, which is my preferred way of typing, or you can pop it down on the desk. But I have found with this model, with this well, it's a bit stiffer and it does seem to sort of rock up a little bit, which the oldest Typecover didn't used to do. So as we move up to the screen, as I mentioned, it's a 120Hz high DPI 13-inch screen that goes up to about 500 nits of brightness. It is incredibly glossy, just like all previous Surface Pros before it, but this is something you soon get used to, and if you do use it like a tablet, it is handy because obviously you're going to be using it as a touchscreen. On previous Surface Pros, I have bought anti-glare sort of covers, and those are quite useful. I expect you will be able to buy one for this model soon. Now, as we move up to the speakers, we've got the two stereo speakers facing towards you. We cut into the edges. This is something that really took me by surprise. The Surface Pro 8 speakers are really good and a massive step up from previous Surfaces. They sound like this. Speaker test at 30%. Now up to 60%. And full blast. So there we go. Doesn't get quite as loud as some other laptops, but the quality is really impressive and a massive step up from previous Surface Pros. Now, as you can see, I have got the old Surface Pro 7 Plus here. I will be doing a direct head-to-head comparison with regards to the actual performance and the sound quality and everything else. So if you are interested in seeing that video, please make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell and you will be notified of that video. But in the meantime, let's take a look up at the webcam. And this is what the webcam and the microphones look and sound like on the Surface Pro 8. So not only are the webcam and microphones good on this machine, but we do also have Windows Hello. It works incredibly responsively on this machine, logging in split seconds. And as I've said in many of my other videos, Windows Hello facial recognition is by far my favourite way of logging into any machine. So just moving to the back of the machine, we've got the usual kickstand. Slide it all the way down. Gives you a great incline for when you are actually drawing on the laptop. And this is one of the reasons I've always really enjoyed the Surface Pro. It's so versatile. You can be typing with it like a laptop 1 minute, and the next minute you can rip this keyboard off and you're down to whatever angle you want for whatever incline for taking notes, drawing, sketching, Photoshop work, and it works incredibly well. Now, I would love to be an artist. I love to draw, but I'm absolutely dreadful. But doesn't mean I can't try. And with this new pen, it's a much improved way of drawing than the previous Surface Pro's pen. You'll notice it's more of a sort of a flatter shape this year with the button on the side and still the eraser button at the top. But we've actually got some haptic feedback now. Now with a 120Hz screen, it does make it a lot more accurate when you are drawing on the actual surface itself. But also you can adjust the actual feedback. So as you are sort of pushing down and like scratching hard on your tablet, it gives you a feeling as if you're actually using a pencil on paper. And this is something that's really impressive, and it's, you know, you can adjust that feedback as well, and it does actually feel like you're drawing on paper. It has been incredibly responsive, and I've really enjoyed using this for sort of taking notes and actually drawing. So for the artists out there, this is certainly a much improved experience over the previous Surface Pros. So now that we've looked around the machine, how is the performance? And to be honest, this is a bit of a mixed bag. The good news is the engineers have worked absolute marvels on this little device, being able to pump out much more performance than the same CPU in the previous Surface Pro 7 Plus. But the bad news is Microsoft have released this device right on the cusp of Intel's new Alder Lake CPU launch, which should have a serious uplift in the actual performance. Also, being a quad-core 15-watt CPU, it is handily beaten by Apple's original M1 chip and the Ryzen 5000 15-watt CPUs. The Iris Xe graphics still hold up well for an integrated GPU and will allow for light gaming and eSport titles to run well. The thermals of this machine are kept well in check, with the CPU sitting in the mid-60s even in a long gaming session, and there's no throttling at all, with the CPU easily able to maintain between 28 to 32 watts during a long game of Dota 2. With regards to heat management, firstly, being a tablet, we never need to worry about a hot palm rest or keyboard, which is something I've always loved about the Surface Pros. But the top, front, left and the rear of the actual tablet do heat up when under sustained heavy load to about 45 degrees centigrade. This may be too hot to use it as a tablet, but I can't imagine a scenario where you're going to be using the Surface at full load whilst using it in your hands. So overall, it is a solid device that will handle most people's workloads. It's just a shame that Microsoft didn't either hold it off for a little while longer and add Alder Lake, or release this a little bit earlier where the Intel 11th gen chips were in their prime. With regards to battery life, switching the device to 60Hz gave us just over 7 hours with our usual YouTube streaming test over Wi-Fi at 50% brightness and 50% speaker volumes. This is very similar to last year's Surface Pros, and it's still not that great when you look at some of the competitors. But the good news is, with these 11th gen chips, they are incredibly snappy on battery. When you're using the device for your normal workloads, the machine does feel incredibly snappy, almost as if you're on mains. So having put this laptop through its paces now for a good 2 weeks, I have really enjoyed using this Surface Pro 8. Now, for somebody that's used the Surface Pros all the way through the series, this for me has been a much bigger upgrade than I was actually expecting. When I first saw just the spec bump, of just the 120Hz and Thunderbolt 4, I thought, this is just not really for me. But when you look deeper and you see the fact that we've got the increased screen size, the new pen with haptic feedback, with the new Typecover that actually charges the pen and keeps it out the way, much better speakers, the improved functionality that Thunderbolt 4 brings, then I realised this is a much better package than I initially thought. And having used this now, it's made me realise how dated my 7 Plus was that I've been using now for the last, well, pretty much a year since I've had it. So I've got to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the price. And now when you're buying any Microsoft Surface products, you know you're going to be paying a price premium. But with this one, you're talking £999 in the UK just for the tablet, for the base model, which is an i5 and 8GB of RAM with 128GB of RAM. Then you need to add another 150 on for the signature type cover. If you want that pen to go into the magwell, that's another £120. You're talking about £1,280 for this whole package, and that's the base model. If you want 16GB of RAM or an i7, you're looking at, well, going up to nearly £1,800 to £2,000. That is crazy money. Now, obviously, if you don't need all the bells and whistles of the Surface Pro 8 and you just want the 2-in-1 functionality, you could consider the 7 or 7 Plus. With this one being out in the market now, there's a lot of deals on the old 7 or 7 Plus models. You may well want to go that route. But if you're coming in afresh and you've got a good budget, then I would highly recommend this Surface Pro 8. It makes a really good 2-in-1 device. So if you're looking for somebody that's doing a bit of art, using it for an all-around computer and a tablet every now and again, because let's be honest, Windows tablet functionality is nowhere near something like using an iPad. I definitely recommend this device. But if you've got a Surface Pro 7 or the 7 Plus or maybe even a 6, I'm not sure if it's worthwhile value to upgrade, especially as you will need to buy a new type cover. You'll probably want to buy the new pen, although the old pen will work. The whole lot ends up costing you a lot of money. And as I said earlier on, the fact that we are right at the end of the 11th gen's life cycle and we're right at the beginning of the 12th gen, I think almost Microsoft was a little bit silly releasing this product now. They should have waited another month or two and given this as a 12th gen as a whole new product, because the CPU in this is the same CPUs that are offered in the 7 Plus. But yes, they do work better because of the improved cooling in this model. Now, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Would you consider buying the Surface Pro 8? Do you think it's worthwhile upgrading from a 7 or 7 Plus, or buying instead of a 7 or 7 Plus? Please pop your comments down below and I will get back to you, and I do love reading them. And as always, thank you for watching.